cusp of turning 40. I couldn't walk up a full flight of stairs without having to pause, winded, out of breath. That moment was the beginning of a new journey in which I was trying to understand who I was. My vehicle for doing that was ultra endurance sports. It was much more of a spiritual journey than it was an athletic journey. Your relationship with your own mind is perhaps the most important one, because it's our wounds that we misinterpret as superpowers.
What do you think is the biggest wound you're mislabeling as a superpower right now?
We now live in a world in which it takes almost a superhuman effort to even engage with our interior selves. It's about the tiny little things that you're doing every single day that are easy to blow off, that move the needle the most. All the success is a product of that philosophy. And that's how over time you're redirecting your sense of who you are and rewiring that story to be one that is self-honoring.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Know Thyself. Our guest today is a globally renowned ultra-distance endurance athlete, host of the widely popular Rich Roll podcast. He is a plant-based badass and somebody who I think is really a walking inspiration about the power of transformation, our ability to reinvent our lives at any stage, and to live in alignment and find a life purpose. Rich Roll, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
The honor is mine. Let's dive right in.
Sure.
At this stage of your life, how successfully do you feel like you've detached your internal feeling of enoughness with the external measures and outcomes of your endeavors?
That's a very good question. Yeah, this is a daily struggle. You know? On the one hand, I'm successful by every kind of Western metric beyond anything that I ever thought, I would be able to accomplish. And so I'm really present and engaged in gratitude for this privileged position that I find myself in, where I get to have what I think you would agree, like, is perhaps the best job in the world, which is to engage with really brilliant people that you're curious about, in this structured forum where you get to explore ideas that lead to personal growth, and then you get to share it with lots of people, and it impacts those people in positive ways, and there's a ripple effect to that. And I just think it's a beautiful thing. And I never lose sight of just how privileged I am to, be able to be in this space. At the same time, we live in a material world, and now I have disposable income, and so I'll fall prey as much as anybody else to my happiness would be enhanced if I got this thing or that thing, or I could grow my show to this, or what other areas can I push myself in where I can expand my capacity to consume more and kind of elevate my status. So I wouldn't say that I've transcended any of those things. I'm not an enlightened human being, but as Arthur Brooks is very quick to say, no amount of power, property, or prestige is going to land you to that sacred place where you are free from struggle and difficulty and obstacles. And it certainly isn't a path to happiness. So those two things, obviously are in conflict with each other. But I would say overall, because I didn't get into this for any kind of material purpose, on some level, it's all this mystical spiritual journey that I've been on that I had nothing to do with. I've been a passenger, which allows me to, approach what I do with a level of humility and appreciation, because yes, I've worked hard and I've been consistent and I've done all the things, but it's not the product of some goal that I set for myself or some whiteboard agenda. It's unfolded very gradually over a long period of time. So it's not like I got smacked in the face with, all kinds of success immediately. I've matured into it. And so I'm able to have an arm's length kind of healthy relationship with it.
Yeah, I know alongside that, you've been on a journey the past couple of years renegotiating how you enact yourself while you do what you do, for trying to find more ease and joy in this great gift that we have during podcasting and everything else you do in the world, and kind of relinquishing the conditioning of making things hard and controlling things to a T. And I'm just curious, in conjunction with that feeling of enoughness and cultivating ease within everything that you're doing in life, where do you feel like you're at within that process?
I think I'm improving, but I still have work to do. It's, again, a conflict between self-will and surrender. On the one hand, I'm very good at self-will. I can be a very willful person. And many of the successes that I've had are due in some part to the fact that I know how to work really hard. I have a profound relationship with suffering. I'm not one to quit early or go home, before the work is done. And I have control freak issues, and I care about the details and all of those things. And on some level, that's a motor that I can leverage to advance myself. The flip side of that is what I was just talking about a minute ago, which is you have to let go. You have to surrender and understand that you're really not the pilot here. And that's where the cultivation of ease can come in, to kind of say, hey, listen, there's more going on. This is not about me. I'm not the center of the universe, and my ego is actually more of an impediment to the mission that I'm on than an ally. And so, again, it's another kind of battlefield that's going on. But I think I'm pretty good. I've gotten a lot better at letting go. I'm in the process of writing a book right now. And so this is kind of flaring up in me, where I think if I'm not bleeding on the page, it's not good. But often, when I'm in that mindset, what's on the page, becomes degraded the more I, apply my self-will, and the more I can get into that headspace and mindset of ease and flow, and allow myself to be a channel for the highest good, and to kind of get out of the way. Ultimately, that is not only a better, healthier, and more sustainable path, and a more spiritual path, and a more humble path. It's also the better path in terms of the quality of the work that I'm trying to put out. So again, you do have to put the work in, but on some level, you also have to get out of the way.
So much of our path is like, we use the evidence of our history of how we got success in the first place, which oftentimes in the society is through that force, will, and control to inform how it's only possible to create more of that success, or even to greater degrees, or really redefining what success means in the first place. And, when you're in the throes of unawareness, by definition, you're not paying attention to the process in which our ego is playing out in that identity structure. And so what's been like the actual biggest thing to help you regain that consciousness and choice, and not compulsively going back to that kind of old paradigm of how you have operated? If you look at through your behaviors, there's obviously the perspective shift that you just shared. But what do you think is the biggest thing that actually moves that needle?
To inhabit that better headspace, prayer, meditation, and service are the biggest ones. And these are things that I learned initially when I came into sobriety back in 1998. And that was really the first time that I had to confront how my self-will was moving me away from a more authentic, actualized human being. Because prior to that point, for sure, every success that I had had as a young person, I would credit to my work ethic and my ability to apply myself, and my attention to detail, and my control issues. So whether it was in the classroom or in the swimming pool, all of those successes that I had as a young person, becoming this world-ranked swimmer and getting into all these fancy schools and getting good grades and the like, and getting the jobs, in my mind, I was the protagonist in all of that, and the sole person responsible for that trajectory, which is, of course, an illusion, until alcohol entered the equation. And my life first slowly and then quickly spiraled out of control until I was just an agent of chaos, reaping destruction in my path, and confused and bewildered about my inability to master this dysfunction. Like, I'm somebody who knows how to apply. I can get up at 4 a.m. and train and do, all these things. The more I applied that sense of myself, that capacity, that self-will to this problem of alcoholism, the deeper my hole got. And it wasn't until I was in so much pain and willing to entertain a different way, to raise my hand, ask for help, and actually receive help, that I was able to change that relationship. And truly, that is through surrender. I had to, instead of force myself to figure out how I was going to solve this problem with my mind, I had to surrender and begin to appreciate and inhabit a more spiritual relationship to myself. And that was the genesis of this growth trajectory that I've been on ever since. And with that, again, comes the subjugation of the ego, the celebration of humility. And those are things, again, to your point and to your question, are cultivated through meditation, not active meditation when you're like, out on a trail running and you think you're meditating, but a formal meditation practice, prayer, which can mean, any number of things to any number of individuals. It's of your design. Just basically a relationship with the beyond, call it your higher power, the universe, whatever you want to call it, God. And then the practice of subjugating the ego comes through selfless service to others. It allows me to get out of my way and disabuse myself of the idea that I am the center of the universe and this protagonist, and appreciate and understand that making yourself available for other people and lending a helping hand without asking anything in return is the way to kind of get out of your own head and all of the problems that swirl around in your mind that you can become otherwise obsessed with.
Yeah, that clarity of mind that one can cultivate through prayer and service to others, but mainly meditation. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more of your practice of solitude. And, it's just I noticed this again this morning. I've shared this before, but, I was just in the sauna and there was an AC unit nearby, and then it turned off randomly. And you weren't aware that it was on prior to it turning off, but the contrast of that experience makes you realize how noisy your environment was. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is analogous to our internal reality, where we have so much noise and endless rumination, and to a degree we're not fully aware of. And until we have the contrast of that settling down, we don't realize how dysregulated it makes our nervous system. And I know that you've consciously made an effort, with your daily practices, but then also yearly, to take an extended amount of time in silence and solitude off grid. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on how that's really impacted your journey to cultivate clarity of mind.
Yeah. I mean, what you're referring to is the micro and the macro. Like in the micro sense, when you engage with meditation and you develop some acumen around that, you begin to understand and appreciate the extent to which your unconscious mind is driving thoughts, behaviors, and decisions in ways you were previously unaware. And that's to say that for the most part, and to a degree larger than I think most of us are willing to appreciate or admit, we're living our lives reactively based upon those unconscious loops and signals and the stories that we repeat in our mind about who we are and what we're capable of and who did this to us and this is the way we are, and all of these things. Like this tape that is running incessantly in our mind is actually driving outcomes in the real world. It becomes the operating system for how we interact with other people, how we make decisions, big and small, and we can't overestimate just how profound that impact is. And when you develop the ability to be still and to notice that, that opens the door to a path towards better mastering what those stories are and the signals of the unconscious mind, so that you can, at a minimum, develop the capacity to pause when agitated, to respond rather than to react, to put the lie to the looping stories and cultivate better ones that are more in service to the authentic self within. And that in turn creates better outcomes in the real world. So I think that is fundamental towards living a self-actualized life or being on the path towards greater self-actualization. And in terms of the macro, yes, I every year I take a month off, and I go someplace. And it's not like I'm a hermit or a monk, but the point is to shut everything down, to put space and time in between, what I do for a living and who I am as a human being, so that I can delve deeper into the meditation and the silence and really embrace a solo experience, so that I can gain perspective on what am I doing? Just because I've been doing this a certain way, should I be doing, what is the best, what is the best channel for my limited time, energy, emotion, intellect, et cetera, so that when I return from that experience, I have a greater degree of clarity. And the first time I did this, I was incredibly resistant to it, because I'd been operating for, I think, 7 years at that point without taking any time off. And, the podcast was really born out of a period of time, an extended period of time in which myself and my family were going through a very difficult period of financial dismantlement. It was incredibly hard to just get the bills paid. We almost had our house repossessed. We had or foreclosed on. We had cars repossessed. It was hard, and it was emasculating and extremely challenging. And I'm happy to go into more details about that if you want. But the point is that when the podcast and the other things that I was doing started to click in finally after many years, and I was starting to be able to pay the bills and put a little bit of money away and develop a solid foundation financially, economically, where I could support my family, I was persisting on this PTSD for many years, where I thought, I have to, finally it's working. I have to push, because if I take my foot off the gas, it's all going to fall apart, and we're going to go back to that place that I never want to return to, until I was tiptoeing up against the precipice of burnout. I just had not given myself a break in so long. I was just propelled by that fuel, and that fuel source was running out. And so out of necessity, I took that month off, and it was revelatory. And now I have a healthier relationship with my work, and I've disabused myself of some of that trauma, I guess, and now I do it prophylactically. I don't necessarily need the break, but I build it into the year, and I prepare months and months in advance, so that everything is kind of taken care of when I take that time off. And it's been really profound. And obviously, not everybody has the ability to do that. I recognize privilege in that as well. And I don't take it lightly, but it's been fundamental to not only keeping me fresh with the things that I do for a career, but also, again, it just refines and sharpens my perspective and the clarity around purpose and meaning and the things that I'm invested in.
I can only imagine how really necessary it is for you to stay connected to your why of what you're doing, because it's so easy to get in the motions with podcast after podcast, after business meeting, after thing. And unless you have that space, which, it's a privilege to have a month off, but we can all create pockets of that in our life at a more micro scale to, see as the ship's taking off from harbor, if a 1 degree change over the course of a year lands you in a completely different destination. And so I could imagine over time, these little pivots that you make, afforded to you by these periods of solitude really land you in a different place in life, internally and externally.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
I want to dive a little bit more into what you were talking about with that period of life where the podcast was really born out of, which was this immense period of strife and struggle, the emasculation and not being able to provide in the way that you dreamed to for your family. There's kind of two things that kind of come to mind. One is your internal journey of, not the emasculation not really showing up in the way that you wanted to. And then the inner voice of the podcast coming to you, like, and the decision to create that, which of course you had no idea could turn into what it is now. But I'm curious if you can share a little bit about the texture of how that came in to be, what your thought process was around it when it came in.
With respect to the podcast specifically?
Yeah. And then coming, kind of out of that period of time.
Sure. So backing up a little bit, I had been a corporate lawyer for many years. I'm somebody who is a product of an achievement-oriented household, and was raised in a home in which education was very important and upward mobility was the priority. And my parents were great. Like, all my needs were met. Like, I don't come from a broken home or anything like that. It was just sort of expected, like, this is the path this is the ladder you're going to climb, right? And I got into all the nice schools and went to law school, and I very dutifully followed that blueprint on the implied promise, I suppose, even if on an unconscious level, that this would be the path towards not only respectability and financial stability, but also, of course, happiness. I had fits and starts because, despite the fact that I graduated from Stanford and Cornell Law, I was harboring this progressive relationship with alcoholism that on some level was a percolating existential crisis. Like, it was sort of something inside me telling me that my discomfort had to be medicated, and that discomfort could be tracked back to being on the wrong track or never cultivating enough introspection to ask myself, like, well, what is it that you want to do? Like, you're running this program for life that was embedded upon you, but you've never stopped for a moment to think, maybe there's another path for you, or what is it about, what is it that speaks to you? What are you curious about? How would you like to show up in the world and express yourself? All of those things were kind of repressed and muted as I, ascended each rung of this ladder. And that ultimately, met its match when alcoholism got the upper hand and I got sober. But then I spent the next 10 years building this foundation of sobriety, but also very much intent on rebuilding all of the goodwill and respectability that I'd squandered as a result of my drinking and using. And my goal was really to just become that person that I was at 18 when I had so much promise and the world was truly my oyster. So again, even being introduced to spiritual tools and meditation and a better program for living that the 12 steps gifted me and continue to gift me, I was still missing the bigger picture of spiritual and personal growth. And so I had another crisis on the cusp of turning 40 when this existential crisis of being this lawyer kind of caught up to a health scare, because for that 10-year period, I wasn't really taking care of my physical body. I'd gained a bunch of weight and was pretty depressed about this career choice that I'd made, but felt very trapped and couldn't find a way out. And so that moment, which culminated in a staircase episode where, I couldn't walk up a full flight of stairs without having to pause, winded, out of breath, and the like, was this moment of clarity, not unlike the day that I decided to finally get sober, where I realized I was blessed with a certain willingness. There was like this portal that opened, and it felt very similar to that previous day 10 years earlier, and I knew I needed to take action on that. And that was the impetus and the beginning of a new journey in which I was trying to understand who I was. My vehicle for doing that was ultra endurance sports. It was never a goal to become a competitive ultra endurance athlete in my mid 40s. And the success that I've experienced in that world aside, what gets missed, I think, often when people ask me about it, is the fact that it was much more of a spiritual journey than it was an athletic journey. Like, all that time alone with my breath and my heartbeat in a solitary state out in nature was almost a survival mechanism of me trying to figure out who I was. And I needed that capaciousness, like all of that time alone in nature by myself, in that, kind of